Hey guys, if you're already here, I hope you can hear me. It registers that you're able to hear me. I will be starting in about 10 minutes, so you can just get comfortable, get coffee. Well, I guess it's a little late for coffee, so maybe get water, and we'll start in just a little bit. Hey gals, I hope you've been able to get in just fine. We've got several people already joined. I hope you can hear me. If you can't, you should have the ability of clicking on the question and answer box. You can look around a little bit. I don't have the viewer side up, I just have my side. So if you have questions, you should be able to ask them, and I will be able to answer those both throughout the presentation and then also um, during the presentation and afterwards. So if you have any trouble hearing me, if you have trouble seeing anything, you're more than welcome to ask questions right there. And we'll get started in just a few minutes, probably a little bit after 9, like 9:02, just so some more people can go ahead and join. Okay, gals, we're gonna kind of get started. I'm gonna kind of go over what we're gonna do, and I am going to turn the camera on, actually stop screen sharing here for a little bit for the beginning of our webinar. Hey there, here I am. Oh, perfect. Sorry, I'm a little bit of a slouch tonight. I don't look really great. I actually have a bathrobe on. How lazy is that? But I figured you wouldn't judge me because I am at my house. So I can be a little bit lazy. But I am very excited to try this out. This is a fun new thing that I'm kind of testing right now. Just trying to see how it works, if y'all enjoy it. And I actually have a favor to ask you before we get started. I'm doing this for fun, but I'm also doing it for a class, which is why I'm talking about this particular topic. So I need someone to evaluate the webinar afterwards to send in for this particular class. So if anyone wants to volunteer for that, feel free to email me afterwards and I will send you the form. And I would need it by Friday, but it would be awesome if you could help me out with that. That would be super fun. You can kind of help me get a good grade in my class. So that's something that I will talk about again at the end to remind you. But today what we'll be talking about is seeing God in our struggles, which is the name of this particular webinar. And that's a pretty generic title, I realize that, but we all struggle with different things. And when I get emails from girls or I talk to them in person, a lot of times what comes up is what they're struggling with, whether it's a sexual sin, whether it's an eating disorder, whether it's something like gossip or lying, or it could be anything. Sin is sin. We know that's the case. So we all have different struggles, whether it's contentment, singleness, financial problems. This world is fallen and those things happen. So when you have those kinds of struggles, it's sometimes hard to understand, hard to know what to do with them. Where do we go? So I'm right here with you learning this. I have things in my life. I've mentioned before, I struggle with my words and I struggle with being positive. When you think about the world, when you read about the world, it can get pretty depressing. So it's hard for me to sometimes remember that Christ has already overcome. We have every reason to be joyful. So what we're going to talk about today is how we can practically see God in our struggles, see him moving, what to do in those struggling times, those tough circumstances that can help us withstand anything that comes at us. And we have a fantastic example of that in the story of David. And we're going to read that story. We'll not read it word for word, but I'm going to talk about it, kind of summarize it for us. And I'm going to bring up our PowerPoint here while I talk about it briefly. Okay? All right. Also, you should have a question and answer option, so you're more than welcome to go ahead and utilize that. It should be on your right-hand side or down at the bottom, so you can utilize that if you have any trouble. And just so you know, if you need to get caught up on anything, this is being recorded. So you would want to fast forward through the first like 20 minutes because it had to be started before y'all could log in. So you'll have to fast forward a little bit, but it should be good now. All right, so let me get to this screen here. You should be able to see that. And okay. All right. So what we're going to talk about today is David and Absalom. They are our illustration. I don't know how familiar you are with the story of Absalom, but he was David's son, one of many of David's sons. David had several wives, 3 or 4, and Absalom was one of his sons. Absalom was known to be a handsome man. In scripture, it actually says in 2 Samuel 14:25 that no man in all of Israel was as handsome and highly praised as Absalom. From the sole of his foot to the top of his head, he did not have a single flaw. And then it goes on to talk about his hair. This guy had a head of hair to envy. Revlon would love it. He just had everything going for him. Kind of reminds me of Saul. Do you remember Saul from earlier in, I think it's in Kings, where it talks about how Saul was a head taller than all the men in Israel, handsome. He was just fantastic guy, you know, all around. Everybody liked him. They just thought he looked kingly. And Absalom is the same kind of person, very handsome, very motivated. Well, Absalom gets himself into a little bit of trouble. He actually rebels against David. He leaves the kingdom, and then he kind of deceives his dad using a widow to come in with his colleague Joab to come back into the kingdom. And so David takes him back because he loves his son and he wants to have peace with him. Takes back his rebellious son. But Absalom is not up to any good. He acted repentant. He acted like he was ready to repent to his dad for the previous things he'd done. But instead, he begins to plan to overthrow his father. So he sticks around in the kingdom for several years. About 4 years pass, and he is planning to overthrow his father. And he's got some people in his corner to kind of help him out. So he starts making these plans. He starts rallying troops, and he puts his father David on the run. He even in 2 Samuel 17, we hear one of Absalom's allies, Ahithophel, say, "Let me choose 12,000 men, and I will set out in pursuit of David tonight. We'll attack him while he is weak and weary, throw him into a panic, and all the people with him will scatter. And I'll strike down only the king and bring all the people back to you." Because that's what Absalom needs. He needs the people to have a kingdom, because this is all about power. So he says, his ally says, "Hey, look, I'll kill your father, but I'll make sure the people stick around so that you can be their king." So this is all about power. Absalom doesn't even care about his father. He just wants to be in control. He's that selfish. So his father is now on the run, and David is beginning to hear about what Absalom's actual plans are. And a battle ensues, and they're trying to figure all of this out. And eventually, Absalom is defeated. Absalom's death, though, is very traumatic, and it's listed here in 2 Samuel 18, where it says, Absalom was riding on his mule when he happened to meet David's soldiers. When the mule went under the tangled branches of a large oak tree, Absalom's head was caught fast in the tree because Absalom had all this beautiful hair. The mule under him kept going, so he was suspended in midair. One of the men saw him and informed Joab, and he said, I just saw Absalom hanging in a tree. And Joab exclaimed, why didn't you strike him to the ground right there? I would have paid you to do so. And that man didn't want to kill Absalom because he's the king's son. So Joab took Absalom, and Joab had him killed by his armor bearers, and then he threw him into the forest. So that's a very sad ending. This is a very depressing ending to this story. It's good in the sense that David kept his throne, but his own son died after a long fight, after chasing his father, humiliating his father. He died trying to gain power. So we see Absalom's side of this, but what about David? How do you think David felt in this situation? A few things that come to my mind would be helpless, frustrated, betrayed, hurt, humiliated. There's so many ways this could go. What other difficulties do you think entered his life because of these circumstances? I mean, I'd imagine he's now been separated from all of his wives, his other children. He's on the run. He has to plan how to fight against his own son. So he's in conflict of his love for his son, but then what is best for his kingdom. So he's struggling with that. So what I want you to do is take this story and now consider your own life. Now, we certainly have not suffered the way David was suffering in this circumstance, but we all have difficulties that are very real. Have you ever felt betrayed? Have you ever felt as if you were left behind, that you're lonely, that you're single? Are you in a new marriage where you're trying to navigate what that looks like? Or maybe you're a new mom, maybe you're in college, you're at a secular school and you're the only Christian. There's a lot of circumstances and difficulties that can cause us to question where God is in the midst of a struggle. All right, I'm going to go back. All right, I'm back. So when we're talking about these struggles, I want you to really, in your mind right now, as we're all together here, as if we're all sitting in a living room having coffee, I want you to kind of pinpoint one struggle in your life that you have felt pressing on you. It can be, a character flaw. It can be, like I mentioned earlier, it can be singleness or persecution or a family member or something like that, anything. I want you to kind of choose something in your mind to focus on, and we're going to need that later on. So now what we're going to look at, and if you have a Bible with you, feel free to turn to it, or on your phone, go to Psalm 3, because Psalm 3 shows us what David did in the circumstance that he was facing. And we're going to use his example as our guide for the things you've chosen as your particular struggle. I'm going to choose my job. My job is fantastic and I love it in many ways. However, when I got married, I've been married for 10 months to Mr. M. And when I got married, I didn't realize how often Josh and I would be apart. And that's very hard for me. He travels often. I travel often. Of the 10 months we've been married, we have been apart for 6. So it's been very difficult at times, but it's good for something, but it's a struggle. So I'm going to choose that as mine, and I want you to choose something. And we're going to read through Psalm 3 through the whole chapter because it's very short. Psalm 3 is about confidence in troubled times, my Bible says. And then the note says, a psalm of David when he fled from his son Absalom. That's why we read the story of Absalom. Verse 1, Lord, how my foes increase. There are many who attack me. Many say about me, there is no help for him from God. But you, Lord, you are a shield around me, my glory and the one who lifts my head. I cry aloud to the Lord, and he answers me from his holy mountain. I lie down and sleep. I wake again because the Lord sustains me. I'm not afraid of the thousands of people who have taken their stand against me on every side. Rise up, Lord. Save me, my God. You strike all my enemies on the cheek. You break the teeth of the wicked. Salvation belongs to the Lord. May your blessing be on your people. We're going to break this down, but I want you to kind of consider what he's saying here. He starts out stating the facts. The facts are he was being chased by thousands of evil men. Not just his own son Absalom, but Absalom had rallied up all these fantastic fellas to help him chase down his father. And they weren't great guys. So they were increasing. They were increasing probably daily, at least weekly. More and more people were joining Absalom to attack him. So many of them probably were saying, there is no help for King David from God. He is left on his own. There's nothing that he can do about this. He is just going to be stuck where he is. But in the middle of this circumstance, David cites a few very important things. We're going to break this down into 3 steps. I like organization. So the first thing David did was he acknowledged his needs to God. So in verses 1 and 2, he acknowledged his situation. He told God, this is what's happening. Do you think we have to tell God what's happening? Probably not. He knows what's happening. He knows that there is a tough circumstance that we're in. He sees it. But by acknowledging it, we evidence that we want God involved in the situation, that we want his help, that we want to talk with him about this, that we want to involve him in our lives. We're saying, God, I don't have control over this. And the truth is we don't have control, but we like to think that we do a lot of times. So when we come to God and we say, Lord, I need your help on this, we're acknowledging our need and our dependence and our trust and our faith in God. So David says this, but then he moves on to take a second step. And that step is reminding himself of God's character. And this is something, when I was doing the study of this passage, I was very excited about this because I realized how practical it is. And I'm extremely practical. I love to have lists of things to take away and to actually implement after I listen to something. And so I hope that's what you can do, is you can actually implement something after this webinar. He reminded himself of God's character. And we're going to look at exactly how he did that, because I'm going to screen share one more time. All this back and forth keeps you listening. All right. So he acknowledges his needs to God. Then he reminds himself of God's character. So if you have the psalm in front of you, and even if you don't, we're going to look at verse 3. He states, after saying that he is in a dire circumstance, you, Lord, are a shield around me, my glory, and the one who lifts my head. He states that God is his shield. He's his protection. God is our protector, our provider, the one who stands between us and sin, between us and destruction. Does that mean that we're never going to die? No, we're mortal. But it does mean that God will be with us. I listened to a webinar through influence.net, the Influence Network, which is a fantastic resource for women bloggers. And Heather Borsman is the one who actually gave the webinar. I loved it. And she was talking about the promise of God in hard times as well. She described it as the promise of his presence. We often think that in hard times we have the promise of hope or joy or love or peace. But what she said, and what stood out to me the most, was that the promise that God gives you is not his hope, his peace. The promise is his presence. So when David describes God as his shield, that's a wonderful example of how God's presence protects us when we are in these difficult circumstances. It surrounds us on every side. There's actually a worship song called "You, O Lord, Are a Shield About Me." I remember I played it for a piano recital when I was 16. You can't forget that kind of thing. But it's an excellent song, and it's an excellent concept. In verse 3, a little further on, 3b, he says that God is his glory. Basically, God is his goodness, his justice. He is the justifier of David, that David doesn't need to get his glory from being king or having a throne or a beautiful palace because he's on the run right now. He gets his glory from God. because he is the one who lifts his head. Do you ever sit down when you're depressed or you're struggling with one of these circumstances? Let's use singleness as an example, because I remember being single and many of my readers are, and it can be very hard. That's one of the reasons I don't call singleness a gift. When I was single, when people told me that singleness was a gift, I wanted to stick a sock in their mouth. I wanted to just send them away. I was so tired of hearing it. And looking back as a married woman, yes, I see how I had a lot of freedom. I had lots of things I could do and go, pick up and leave. But I still don't think it was necessarily a gift. I believe it's a testing period, which can be a gift, but it's also a trial. So during a single period, during any kind of circumstance where we're either lonely or we're struggling with some sort of emotion, we usually are downtrodden in countenance, in face, in heart. So when David says that God lifts up his head, it's literally the image of someone kneeling down, bent over in tears, and God reaching down and lifting them up. I recently read in Mark 8 about Jesus healing the blind man. I read it this morning. And when Jesus healed him, he actually took him by the hand and led him out of the village. And then he put his hands on his eyes and said, "Be opened." When I went back over my notes for this webinar, that same concept seems to come out of this passage when he says he lifts us up. He takes us by the hand and he leads us forward. He lifts us up out of our circumstances when we call on him, when we trust him. He's right there. He takes us by our hands. He lifts up our face to look into his. And isn't that a wonderful thing? I just love picturing that. And I want you to picture that for a minute. Next time you are struggling or you're emotional over something that is just too big for you to handle, just picture God lifting up your face to look into his. It's such a beautiful image. I love that David uses that here. He also says that God answers us when we call. That's in verse 4. He says, "I cry aloud to the Lord, and he answers me from his holy mountain." God is so pure and so great. It's amazing that he answers us when we call. It really is. We are humans, and that's so hard to comprehend when you come from Christian culture where we're always talking about God and we love God and we sing to God and we do all this stuff about God. We forget sometimes the majesty of who he is and the fact that he answers us when we call. This is one of the reasons I encourage having a prayer journal and writing down your requests and then also writing down the answers, because no matter what situation you're in, you'll be able to look back and you'll be able to see God's faithfulness. One of my favorite examples of this is I actually wrote letters to my future husband intermittently in a little book that I had for about 5 years before meeting Mr. M, Josh. And I have one letter in the booklet that I gave to Josh on our wedding day that said, it was a prayer. It was a letter that just said, I'm looking forward to meeting you. I'm praying for you, just praying that God is with you as I, face this time of loneliness, because I was lonely at the time. Well, I looked at the date after we were married, and I realized I had already met my husband when I wrote that letter. I just didn't know it yet. God was so faithful as I was coming to him and telling him, my concerns and praying for my future husband. I already knew him, but I just didn't know. And I just think that's such a great example of how God answers us when we call. It's not always going to be a husband, but no matter what it is, whether it's a job, whether it's a relationship that needs healing, or you physically need healing, God hears us. And the point of that prayer is to bring us into a closer relationship with him. It also says that God rescues us. In another version of verse 4, it says that God rescues us. He rescues us from our emotions, from our circumstances, from everything that assaults us. God will allow us to be tested, But remember that nothing reaches you that isn't filtered through his hand. He's not standing up there wringing his hand saying, oh man, how did that get through and touch Becky? How did that get through and touch Haley? Oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I totally forgot to send an angel to guard her from financial ruin. That's not the case. He rescues us from the things that he has allowed to test us. And in verse 5, it says that he not only does that, but he sustains us. We can lie down and sleep in peace and wake again because the Lord sustains us. A lot of people really struggle to sleep in today's culture. There's all these reports going about how we need to sleep, we need to get enough rest, but people sometimes, they have a hard time sleeping. They take sleeping pills or they drink alcohol to try to help them go to sleep. But when you trust God, when you give up those stressful things in your life, those worries, into his hands, he sustains us in peaceful rest. I find that hard because I stress about almost everything that's able to be stressed over. I just finished season 3 of Downton Abbey and I want to eat everything in my kitchen. I'm just emotionally drained. That's a bad example, but I do get very stressed out about things. And that is something that evidences I'm not trusting God with those situations, not Downton Abbey, but generally life situations such as money and job, relationships, getting things done on time, fulfilling all my commitments. I can be sustained in peaceful rest as I acknowledge these to God, acknowledge my needs, and then remind myself that God is my shield, the one who lifts me up. He answers me when I call. He's my rescuer and my sustainer. And that's such a wonderful, wonderful comfort. All right, so I'm going to go back again before we kind of talk about this here. I hope that you have thought in your mind about what would be your particular struggle. So what would be the issue in your life that you are facing right now? And now what I want you to do is think about an attribute of God that counters that difficulty. Because that's what David did. Did you see the circumstances that he was in? The circumstances that he was in necessitated a rescuer, a sustainer, someone to answer him when he called. He needed all of that. He needed someone to come to his aid, and that's what God did. God came to him and rescued him. And that is what God can do for you in your circumstance. I'm going to stop sharing here real quick. There, I'm back. Whatever your circumstance is, whether it's singleness, whether it's a financial issue, maybe you're trying to pay off student loans, whatever it is, there's an attribute of God that covers that struggle. Say it's a financial problem. God is Jehovah Jireh. He is our provider. Say it is singleness. I always considered God my kinsman redeemer. In Habakkuk, I believe it says that, or Hosea, or both, it's both, I think, that God loves us like a beloved, like a bride. And in Isaiah, I love a passage in Isaiah, I think it's Isaiah 62, where it talks about how for Zion's sake, we will not be silent because God is our bridegroom. Those kinds of things comfort us to know that God is everything we need for every circumstance that comes. So we can see him in our struggles because he is constantly present, offering everything that we need, the peace, joy, hope, love, reassurance, security, everything. That's what he is. When that becomes hard to believe, I always think about the fact that every good thing that we see in this world had to come from somewhere. It had to. How do we know what good is? How do we know how to even love someone? How do we know to be kind? Those things come from somewhere, and they come from God. They're from his character. So when you realize that all good things in this world have to come from somewhere, and they have to come from God, you can trust that he is the source of everything you need because he was the one who created the world and all that's in it in the first place. So you can hunt around the world to try to find something to satisfy. But in the end, The source of the world is the source of everything that you need for the struggles that you're facing. So today, this is a short webinar, but I wanted to keep it short. I wanted to just have you all consider what attributes of God counter what you're facing. I have a challenge for you. I would like you to write down your struggles this week, whatever it is, and then find an attribute of God that compares to that particular struggle. And then I want you to find 3 verses for that attribute and use those this week whenever that struggle comes up or you start to worry about it or stress about it. So if it's singleness, maybe look up Isaiah 62, look up the passage in Hosea. I'm sure Hosea is a fantastic book, so you'll find something in there. And in Psalms, there's a lot in Psalms that's very helpful. If it's financial difficulty or questions about your future, look up verses about paths of wisdom or God's direction, his will, his provision. And use those particular verses to support yourself throughout this week. And use those whenever you start to doubt, whenever you start to struggle with what you're feeling, with what you are, when those emotions start to overwhelm you. And this also applies to temptations, because I say struggles and it's such a huge, broad word, I realize. But that's why I did it, because I know that everyone has a different life and a different lifestyle that they're living. So say it's a temptation. No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. And Jesus was tested just as we are. That's Hebrews. So those verses could be helpful to you as you're facing these temptations. Remember that God is good. God is your rescuer and your sustainer. That applies to temptation. So this week, that's my challenge for you. I would love it if you would just try it out and report back to me if it works, if it helps. I'm doing it too. I'm right here with you. This is all part of the How Holy movement that was started by some of the readers. I can't get over it. They send me these pictures and it just blesses my heart so much. But based off the post, how far is too far? Stop asking how far is too far. They've started doing the hashtag How Holy to ask themselves, how holy can I be in every decision? So when you are making these decisions and you're overwhelmed with that feeling of that struggle, that emotion, think about, how holy can I be in this situation? And let it remind you to exalt God's attributes in that particular moment. Remind yourself, God is loving right now. I don't need to be lonely. He will fulfill me. He has it all in hand. He knows my desires. He's going to take care of me. I don't have the money for this right now, but I know that God is going to provide for me, and I'm just going to trust that. I have a cool story about that, actually. We use Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace method for our finances, and it's fantastic. Highly recommend it. So we're paying off our student loans right now, and we're getting very close, but that means that we don't have a ton of money for Christmas presents, and we both have very large families. So it was going to be a little difficult, and I was trying to get creative to make the gifts happen for this Christmas. But I got an envelope in the mail and I thought it was just another insurance claim. I get them all the time and I don't like to look at them. So I had left it, not really looked at it. So I opened it several days later and it was a refund check for enough money to cover all the Christmas presents for both of our families. And I have 5 siblings, he has 6 siblings and parents, and then nieces and nephews. So that's a lot of people. And it was just such a blessing that God provided that to help us right in the time we needed it. He also provided another surprise that helped us pay down the loans faster. There were so many things that God provided to help us in this endeavor financially. So God knows what you're struggling with. He knows the things that you don't pray for. I never prayed for Christmas money. I didn't think about it. I mean, it crossed my mind and I was a little worried about it, but I just figured I'd make do. God answers our needs before we even know that they're there. He is that caring and that loving and that wonderful. And that should make us worship him. Should make us so grateful for who he is, reminding us of who he is and how great a God it is that we serve. We forget that sometimes. We hear God, we hear Jesus. We're so used to hearing their names, but we forget exactly how kind our God really is. And David knew that. And that's why David wrote the way he wrote, because he truly knew God and he loved him so dearly. So that's the conclusion of our little webinar for today. I wanted to do a short one, again, just as a starter, and then I will take suggestions for future webinars. What topics would you like to see? The nice thing about a webinar versus a video is that I can actually answer questions on site. So you're welcome to ask questions now, or send me suggestions for future webinars. I would be glad to do that, because that way I can interact with readers while talking about topics that are more popular even. Some of the relationship posts that I do are very popular, so that could be a good webinar if you think the interaction would be more fun. So thank you again for joining me today. I really appreciate it. I'll leave it open for questions a little bit longer while I put the PowerPoint back on the screen. And then for those of you who are interested, I have an evaluation form. If you came in late, I am actually using this both for my blog, but also for a class that I'm taking. So if you're willing to do the evaluation, just send me your email address. I'll send it to you, and I would really appreciate your help with that. Here's a question. Thank you for sending it. In the midst of struggles, I've noticed how easy it is to be self-centered. Do you have any suggestions for how we can still be building up others while we're going through stuff? This is an awesome question. I love it. Such a great question. Yes, I do have a suggestion, and that is simply build up others while you're struggling. I know it sounds very silly, but what it does is it actually shifts your focus off of yourself into the other person's needs, and it distracts you from what you're feeling. This is one of the reasons that I highly encourage single women to get involved in their communities, to volunteer, to try new things, to learn new skills as much as possible. Not that they aren't doing anything already, but sometimes we get in a rut where we are doing the same things, and every day the monotony starts to help make us think more often about what we're struggling with. We start to think, gosh, I'm so lonely, or whatever it is, I don't feel well, I've been sick for so long. But when we reach out to our community, when we go into our churches, or whatever it is, a food pantry, a safe house, and we see the people who have needs greater than ours, or we help fill some needs, it takes that weight off of us. And it grants us a sense of fulfillment, knowing that even in our own pain, we're able to show God's love to some other people. I was able to do this in our particular community. There's a safe house for women from abused homes, women and children, and then a home for runaway girls. And I've been to both of them, as well as the Boys and Girls Club here. And I can't tell you how that experience changed me. I've never been on an overseas mission trip. I probably never will, because I feel called to America as a mission field. And going into my own city and seeing these people made me realize that all of my stresses are nothing compared to trying to find food to feed your children at night. A lot of these kids' parents aren't able to feed their children. So what Hannah's asking here about being self-centered is an excellent question. And the best way to not be self-centered is to just go. Just start running, start learning, start picking something to get involved in, even if it's just once or twice. And use your skills to bless someone. Can you cook? Cook something for Thanksgiving. Take Thanksgiving dinners to needy families in the area. Can you sing? Go to a nursing home and play piano or play guitar and sing. They love it. I used to do that in high school. They just absolutely eat it up. Or, bake cookies for someone, a neighbor that you haven't met and you want to meet. Or take a meal to a lady who's expecting a baby. There's so many options. I mean, those revolved around food. Maybe I'm still hungry. I don't know. But you can definitely come up with whatever fits with your skill set to work into your community, and you'll definitely see that your struggles start to diminish. So are there any other questions while I pull up our PowerPoint again here, just so I can leave it up on the screen? All right. I think that's it, ladies. But again, I am so grateful for you joining me today. It's such a blessing every time I get to interact with you all. And again, the recording will be available on YouTube. I'm going to try to edit out that first portion because I think it was just kind of sitting there for 20 minutes. But after that, you guys are welcome to go. I hope you have a wonderful evening. And please email me if you have any questions or if you're willing to do the evaluation. My email is Phelicia Delta, Phylicia, Delta @hotmail.com. And I would love it if I can get at least one person to do that for me because you'll be helping me with my classes. So thank you again, and I hope you guys have a wonderful night.